What we wanted to do now was, last time you were here, we gave you each a designer and you could do your own design to the brief of this large vehicle within our portfolio. What we want to do now is I'm going to get Michel Richter here, one of my very talented designers, to come down. I'm not sure, maybe one of you may have already had Michel do the sketching for you when you were here. But what we're going to do is actually now switch over and we're going to craft the car that we're doing as the showcase. And I'll describe a little bit why he's drawn it that way. So, I think one of the important things you're going to see when Michel's drawing, the image is going to slide. All that is when your physics of your arm are connected and the natural flow of your arm is in a certain direction. So he's using the screen to turn it in the direction of how he wants to draw. So you'll see the image moving around just for the ease of him building up the design. But the way a designer works, and this is why the skill of the designer is thinking of the 3D image in their mind before they put in pen to paper. So the framework he's done here is already thinking about the 3D object minus the details, if you like, and then starting to apply some of those details. So for example, we talked about this is going to be a smaller or B-size SUV, so he's proportionally within the footprint of the car started framing up that overall proportion of car. You can see one of the other strong signature elements was the line that runs across the window shape, the side window shape, and into the hood. Again, building on what we had on the GT, we think that was a very fresh and new way of dealing with the glass to body relationships, and we wanted to build on that idea even further. Then you can also see he's starting to now draw the visor on the front end. What's interesting is the center line of the car, he's drawn very near the edge of the shape, and you'd think that wouldn't be in the middle of the car, but the closer it gets to the edge of the shape, the more perceived plan view you have on the sketch. If this center line was here, that would represent, when he starts to draw it, would graphically make the car look very flat. So you'll start to see when he adds in the shading and the shapes in a moment, you'll start to see how by looking at the proportions of this, you start to get a feel for the amount of plan shape on the car, how the sections flow across the car. But all the time it's in Michel's head where those lines should be. You can always picture that before the line goes on paper. That's something, you can't even illustrate here. So he's now starting to build in the shoulder. And so the key to when you're drawing a sketch from scratch is you have to really think about where's the light source. So imagine here, I don't know, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun's at a certain height in the sky, so it sets up a certain direction of light on the car. If what you usually see is the lower the light source, the darker the top surfaces become, because obviously the light is not then reflecting on the top surfaces. And here you can see very soft shapes. So the transition from light to dark is very gradated. And you'll see in a short while, even just what he's doing there, where you have a much harsher shape or a harsher change of color, then that gives you the impression of something more sharply bending or graphically breaking away. So you get a very different impression here. You can really visually already see that this is a softer shape and here is a more harder shape, and you'll get some of those things as he starts to put on more detail. The way to look also at whether something is lighter or darker is imagine if the light source is coming from 30 degrees, let's say, if you've got a vertical surface or a surface that's perpendicular to the light source, it would be very bright. The more that surface turns away from the light source, then the darker it's becoming. And that's how you have to think about the transition of light when you're sketching. You've got to constantly be thinking about the light source and whether it's a hard shape or a soft shape, and how do you use the tools to convey those shapes and forms. Because ultimately the sketches are done to illustrate a design that the designers want to convey to management, and then ultimately we give that to the modelers to go create the 3D physical shape electronically, in this case, to bring that to life as a 3D object. So you start to see, even within the way reflections work. So the way Michel had this background set up was he's got a vertical wall set up behind the car, which is reflecting down in the car. So that's why you get this reflection. It's only half across the hood. If it was a very flat hood, then this black would probably be all the way over to here. If it was a very rounded hood, it would be the reflection would be further over to the other side. So that's how you start to convey whether a shape's got a lot of form or very little curvature in the shape. And then you can see even here, going from light to dark, again, that's conveying a more softer plan view shape. What he's just doing now, a little detail, I think is the opposite to that. Here, when you have this harsh change of color, like I was talking earlier, this really shows a harder edge. So that would show a little bit of this precision in the surfacing, where you've got a soft shape above and then a more vertical surface. So what this is implying is this surface here is very vertical and upright, and this is very angled and soft and sculptural, and you get the contrast between the two. And then you can already start to see the vertical element of the compass coming through here. So this harsher context coming through and pointing to the badge. Now he's starting to put a little bit of the detail in of the DRLs, or the daylight running lights, the LED signature lights in our front visor. So you can really start seeing how the personality of the front end is coming through there. And because the car is an electric vehicle, by definition, you don't need as much direct cooling. So we've got less cooling openings in this front end than a conventional car. That's why there's more discrete cooling at the front of the car, and we're not playing up a dominant grille element. And then one of the elements of Pure that we've been doing a lot of work on, and we did that on the original GT concept too, is this idea of really simplifying the shut lines, and not just the clarity and purity of the surfaces, but the shut lines too. So for example, a conventional door would have a shut line around its whole boundary, then you have a separate hood line, etc. By doing this roof section here, this roof element, this DLO element, it sort of hides and disguises where the cut line are, because it's such a strong design element. So even though it's a big part of the hood cut line, and it's a big part of the door cut line, because it's such a strong design element, you feel like you've removed one of the cut lines, or maybe two or three of the cut lines. So again, that's one of the things we've been trying to do, is distill things back and really take away what you don't need, this visual detox that we talked about before. There's other shapes and forms been put in here. So he's put a hard reflective form and a softer one over here of light pickup. And what that describes is a hood that has movement, changes of direction. So the hood goes up, then down, then up again to the center. If it was clean, you would leave the rendering much cleaner. You'd leave it as one shape, maybe a bit gradated. So here you also see that we're really doing a darker upper, again like the GT. We wanted to keep this exaggeration of proportions really drive your eye to this very strong signature line through the middle of the car. So we're having a very different body color. This is more silver based, if you like, tone, and this is more black based or dark. So you get a strong contrast between the proportions, and that sets up a certain gesture of the car to give it this very tough and robust proportion. Then you can see what he's starting to do at the rear here is start to build the shoulder in. So again, because the surface is more facing up, away from the light source, it's darker in its tendency. And then at the moment it shows soft, but I think you'll see in a moment that Michel makes it a little bit harder, the contrast between light and dark, which then says that the surfaces are a stronger change of direction. You start adding, like he's doing now, adding more light. That hints at a horizon. So effectively what this is a long, soft horizon. Maybe it's hills or something, a long way in front of the car, maybe a kilometer away or something, as these soft hills, and you'd get soft reflections. If you had buildings very close by, you'd get this as a much more busy set of complex reflections in there. But for the purity of a design sketch, you don't need to worry about real life reflections. It's more about showing the optimum description of the shape. You can also see now more and more the little elements through the center that build in the center crease. And now what he's starting to build in is the wheel arches. So again, if this is a bit tougher, more robust little SUV, yes, it's very stylish and sleek, but we're really making sure that this lower element of the body has this tough, robust character. It's almost like the yin and the yang coming together, you know, the tough, really robust lower with this sculptural, progressive, modern upper to give it that sleekness and modernity. You know, and again, just adding more interesting shapes. So it's not just a wheel arch that goes around in a very conventional shape. It's actually trying to get some more interesting shapes and forms to make it feel a bit more robust and rugged. So, you know, from the designer perspective, these sketches can be very quick. Some are more detailed than others. It really depends on where you are in the program. You know, if you're doing a real production program, you'd start out with a lot of very loose, let's say fairly loose sketches that don't take the designers very long. Maybe later on you'll do more detailed sketches when you're starting to get in the details of the car itself. I think that probably gives you a good enough feel. You start to get a sense of the type of car we're crafting. So very much got a lot of the GT concept in it. And in fact, when people, maybe some of you guys, were talking to me when we revealed the original Opel GT, and people sort of questioned me and said, yeah, but this is a two-seater sports car. How are you going to make other cars in your portfolio pick up on those design cues? Well, I think here's an example showing very much things that are very consistent with what we did in the GT, but creating a very different type of car, and a car that, as I described earlier, is a hugely popular type of vehicle globally right now. The only difference that we didn't have on the GT that we now have on this car is more focus around exactly how to create a new, fresh face for the brand. And that really came about as us being more independent as a brand when we became part of the PSA group last year. We've really given ourselves the independence to be the brand we want to be. Only, everything you see is only Opel. We don't have to worry about our bandwidth within other brands as well. That's really important. So this is why we were able to craft a new face for the brand going forward. So as I say, I think we can stop there. Hopefully that gives you a good feel of the concept and also of how a sketch is constructed and why and how you use the technology to create the visual object. At the end of the day, as you could tell, it really depends on what's up here in the designer's head. You can't just press a button and a sketch like that appears. You've really got to know and visualize that sketch almost before you start putting electronic pen to paper, so to speak, and doing that detail. But you've got to have the right talent in place to do that.